because I really do believe that those abilities, it's like a cycle. We build the creative capabilities in young people so that they can be creatives, that they can be arts managers, so that they can go out there and create the world that they want to see. But they can also take charge of that world and advocate for the changes they want to see.
Welcome to another Let's Talk episode of Tech in the Arts, the podcast series on the Arts Management and Technology Laboratory. The goal of our Let's Talk series is to exchange ideas, bring awareness, and stay on top of the trends. My name is Natalie Larsen. I'm the staff writer and lead researcher for AMT Lab. And today I'm joined by educationalist, cultural administrator, and social entrepreneur Jeff Poulin. In part one of our conversation, we'll be talking about what arts advocacy is and how we can begin to think of ourselves as advocates.
So Jeff, it's great to be joined by you today. I want to start by just asking you to talk a little bit about yourself and your background in the arts and arts advocacy.
My name is Jeff Poulin. I am a teaching artist, an arts manager, and what a lot of folks call a social entrepreneur. My background is probably not unlike many people that end up in the arts management sector. I was exposed to the arts at a really young age because of the public investments in my hometown. I had the opportunity to start dancing and really was able to pursue all of my interest through the K-12 school system in dance and music and theater and visual art, and had some pretty early success. I actually did a tour when I was just 16 years old and learned early on that my real passions were around arts management. I loved being on stage, but I loved making it all happen so much more. However, it was when I was touring, actually, that I saw the experiences of young people all across the country that were very different than mine. I realized how lucky I was to have the opportunities that I had because of that investment in the arts and cultural infrastructure of my town. And it fueled a passion in me, probably combined with some teenage angst, to really make a difference and to improve what was going on. So I began advocating. I didn't call it that at the time. I didn't exactly know what I was doing, but I got involved with some youth organizations and actually advocated for young people to sit on our state board of education, which still is around to this day. And it was actually through that process that I employed some of my own creative skills. I used theater games to activate young people and make them more comfortable talking to legislators. We used performance art, music, visual art, spoken word to communicate really complex messages to those decision makers. And now, in my mid-30s, I can look back and say that was such a solid foundation for what I do today as an arts manager, a social entrepreneur, and an advocate for arts and cultural and creative education for young people, because I really do believe that those abilities, it's like a cycle. We build the creative capabilities in young people so that they can be creatives, that they can be arts managers, so that they can go out there and create the world that they want to see. But they can also take charge of that world and advocate for the changes they want to see. And in fact, what I've learned through my own story and through working with others as an arts advocate and arts manager is that when we do that, we end up with just a better society because people are creative, people are problem solving, and they're able to play and imagine new futures that they never could.
Well, that's awesome. That sounds like some really incredible work. And you touched on the educational aspect and arts, how arts and education play just such a critical role for student development in all kinds of areas, like you mentioned, problem solving, cognitive processing, just all sorts of skills that they can gain from that. So I want to start by asking, how can we as arts managers, whether we're in an organization or we're an independent artist, how can we best advocate for the arts in the education system?
So I have some pretty strong beliefs about advocacy in the arts. And full disclosure, for about 7 years of my life, I worked for a National Arts Service organization advocating for the arts and arts education broadly in American policy, and previously worked in other policy contexts abroad. And through that experience, I learned one thing, and that is that advocacy is our professional responsibility. advocacy, a lot of people think has to do with lobbying the government and meeting with elected officials, when in fact, advocacy is simply about making the case and convincing other people to get on board with a common message or a unified goal. And it's kind of like going back to my roots in dance. It's a muscle memory. The more we do it, the more it becomes more comfortable. The budget is being cut, or there is a negative circumstance that is eliminating the arts in some scenario in the world. And so as arts educators, arts managers, artists themselves, we are the experts on the things that we want to see regarding the arts and education policy, regarding public funding for the arts, regarding the rights of artists in intellectual property or tax law, right? We know how that impacts us. Aren't artists? They don't know. They don't live that. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's a few of them that might identify as artists, but none of them are working living artists, or none of them are working arts administrators or managers or educators or anything like that. And so they don't have that same lived experience. And that is what advocacy is actually about. It's a democratic process where we go and we tell them about the impacts of what it is that they're debating so that they can have informed decisions on the future of whatever it is, whatever law or code or public policy that they're working on. And so we often think of that lobbying angle, which is regulated, and there are certain sets of rules around how we go about doing that. But the reality is, unless you're doing it every single day as part of your profession and making money from it, you don't need to worry about that. So I would say, as artists and arts managers, go out there, talk to people, whether they be philanthropists, public officials, elected officials, or other types of decision makers, like, say, a university president or a big organization leader, or even the most influential person on the block. Tell them about the arts and the impact that they've had in your lives and get them on board with this big message. It's about movement building. It's not necessarily about the laws. Those do change, but it's actually getting everyone on board. What we actually know is that, take arts education, for example. 9 out of 10 Americans believe that the arts should be part of a well-rounded education. Yet when it comes time to debate the public funding for the arts in schools or other policies around teacher credentials or testing or what have you, people kind of forget about it. So it's about raising their consciousness, because everyone wants their kid in an art class and in the band and in the school play, but they don't see the connection between some of these other maybe harmful policies. As an example, people rail against the No Child Left Behind Act from 2001, and the reality is, though, it put a lot of things in place that did hurt the access to the arts, but it also kept the arts as one of the core academic subjects that had to be taught. So there was this dichotomy, and the problem is, though, we failed to have a discourse about it. No one really connected those dots, or the ones that did, it was a very small community. And so it's really about, how do we actually build that awareness and get people on board so that when those key moments happen, people can activate and they know what to say. So what can we do as advocates, as artists and arts managers? Do it every day. You see your, city elected official, I don't know, your alderman or whatever at the Starbucks, go talk to them about the arts. You see that person that has influence over something in your community, go talk to them about the arts. If people have a challenge that they're trying to solve, community cohesion, public beauty, and the, infrastructure, something in the schools, propose the arts as the solution, because we know that it can be the solution, but other people don't.
Yeah, I think it's great that you brought up that it can just be sharing your story, talking about the arts to the people around you and in your community.
Yeah, and as we do that, it's really important to kind of build that muscle, right? If it is a muscle memory, how do we actually build the muscle in the right way? I mean, you think of like a bodybuilder, right? You don't want to only work out your arms, because then you're going to topple over, right? Because your legs aren't going to be strong enough to hold you up. It's kind of the same thing. There's a lot of things, a lot of narratives that have been built about the arts that come from, the culture wars of the early 90s, or that have even been perpetuated from our own field itself. There's a tie, right, between arts learning in schools and certain academic achievement, right? Like the relationship between music classes and test scores in math. Okay, but some of the research that I've done actually shows that when we advocate using some of those points around economic development, raised test scores, the language of these gatekeepers that control funding or public policy, we actually sort of lay the groundwork for our own challenges. Because then all of a sudden, in order to justify why the arts should be part of schools, or to justify why there should be public investment in the arts, we have to quantify it by test scores or economic impact. When in reality, people just like having murals. It's not about whether they go stare at the mural and then go spend money on dinner. Or kids just enjoy being creative and they're able to flex their creativity in new and different ways that aren't necessarily a fill-in-the-dot standardized test. And so I often challenge people who've made the decision that they want to be an arts advocate to really think about the narratives that they're putting forward. Because for about 3 or 4 decades, our own field has laid the groundwork for the very challenges that we run up against. So we need to both speak the language, but also control the narrative. And so one of the things that we can do that's a simple exercise is, as we talk within our own field, is question those outcomes that we're actually discussing. Think bigger, think bolder, use our own creativity, right? That's what we do, theoretically. And let's put it into practice to envision just new ways of talking about this that will actually lay the groundwork for us to succeed versus keep running into the same challenges.
Yeah, that's an excellent point as well. We think a lot, I think, about, like you said, quantifying or thinking about the economic impact of the arts in order to just justify why they should be in our schools and our communities. I'm curious, what is your take on different studies that try to quantify the economic impact of the arts?
Yeah, I think they're both necessary and important and can also be problematic, right? There's a number of studies out there. I think of the Conference Board study that was called Ready to Innovate that found that, most CEOs view creativity as the number one thing that they hire for, or, other studies that do quantify the economic impact of the arts and the relative, GDP increase from the satellite account in the federal government. Like, all of these different things exist, and I'm sure you can drop the links in the chat to these types of studies. And I think they're really important for making the case because people love numbers. But what we can't forget is in advocacy, it's also about the story, right? The numbers convince the mind, but the stories convince the heart. And if you really want to get people on board, it is about sort of changing the heart. I think back to a lot of my experience in Washington, D.C., or in state capitals, or even other capitals in other countries, where, young people will go and play music. And you see legislators, elected officials, government staffers flock to go witness that moment because they literally see a phenomenon happening, right? They witness a transformation where they see a young person go from, kind of teenager that's, maybe a little angsty, maybe a little off the wall, and really find their space as this artist and transform. It's like a caterpillar to a butterfly. You don't get that when you put a report in front of someone. And so I think it's about honing how we bring them together. And I'll just give you an example. We've seen a transformation in advocacy for the arts in the last several years. There were these grand narratives about economic impact and academic achievement and these things that you can simply measure by metrics that are already in place. Questions about things like community development or the justice system and reforming that, and thinking far outside the box, especially around how the arts or creativity broadly, when applied, can change those systems. So in a study that I actually conducted in 2019, we looked really specifically at the role of young artists and how they were applying their creativity towards different causes that they cared about. And those kids from Parkland, Florida, came to Washington, D.C. and led one of the largest marches on Washington since the time of Martin Luther King. And they were theater kids. They were musicians. And what they did is they got on that stage and they activated a group of tens of thousands of people to advocate for changes to their legislators about something they cared deeply about, school safety and gun violence. But they did it through music and theater. They were using their rhetoric skills that they learned in the theater classroom. They were making music that was compelling, had a message and a call to action. That's not what we talk about when we talk about learning the basics and principles of music or theater in schools. We're not necessarily learning that when we memorize Shakespeare or Chekhov.
For listening to Tech in the Arts. Be on the lookout for new episodes coming to you very soon. If you found this episode informative, educational, or inspirational, be sure to send it to another arts or technology aficionado in your life. You can let us know what you think of this podcast by visiting our website, amplab.org, that's amt-lab.org, or you can email us at amplabcmu@gmail.com. You can follow us on Instagram at Tech in the Arts, or Facebook or LinkedIn at Arts Management and Technology Lab. We'll see you for part 2 of this episode.